right, so it is 4 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone who is joining us this afternoon. We are streaming this, excuse me.
And Caitlin just disappeared, but she'll be back.
We are streaming this live on Facebook. Always exciting things happening with a live event. But my name is Caitlin Hoff-Mahoney. I'm the Curator of Collections here at the Matheson History Museum. And we are really excited to be presenting this program today in partnership with Ms. Faye Williams and her organization, Mama's Club. So we're going to be hearing from Ms. Terri Bailey, Dr. Arlisha Norwood, and Ms. Ernestine Wyatt, and they are going to help us commemorate this Memorial Day weekend Harriet Tubman and the other Black women who played such a major role in the Civil War. So a few notes before we get started. We're going to do a question and answer session at the end of the program. So please do use the Q&A function through Zoom to submit your questions throughout, and then the panelists will address them at the end. There will be a brief survey that's going to be sent out via email tomorrow. So please do respond to that. It will help us to know how you liked this program, and we are currently working on scheduling our fall programs. So please do tell us what you would like to see from us, because we really do value your input and want to provide you with things that you want to see. And if you do like what you see today and from our other programs, I hope that you will consider becoming a member of the Matheson Museum. We're an independent nonprofit, and we rely on our members and donors to help us continue to do our work and bring programs like this to Gainesville and Alachua County. So more information about our membership can be found on our website. And then just a few more things is I wanted to share a few of our other upcoming programs in June. On June 13th at 2:30, the Writers Alliance of Gainesville will be presenting a Zoom program about their upcoming book, The Local Lives in a Global Pandemic, Stories from Central Florida, which is a joint project between the Writers Alliance and the Matheson Museum to document COVID-19 in this area. And then on June 14th at noon, I will be presenting through the Alachua County Library District's Adult Summer Camp program about the history of Gainesville. And then on June 26th at 4 p.m., local historian Jonathan Nelson will be sharing history of North Central Florida railroads. So more information about these upcoming events can also be found on our website under the events tab. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Faye to share about her organization and kick us off.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Most folks paying attention already know about Mama's Club, but let me just say a few words about it. We are a nonprofit, and we are located over at GTEC. That's part of Santa Fe over in Hawthorne Road. But I'm not there every day, so if you want to come by, please give me a call. You got my number. We have a Facebook website. The number is listed there, the address, all of that. Now, Mama's Club is not really a club where you go and dance and hang out. It's really a social justice activist group. Mama stands for music, art, movement, action. Why be active in the community if you're not going to go out and do something? Like right now, we have a big meeting tomorrow because we're talking about gentrification and the undermining of Black neighborhoods. We're trying to protect and preserve Black historic neighborhoods in Gainesville, Florida. Our big issue is always the developers. The second issue is always our city commissioners. And our third issue is not having enough money to really beat them back. But we do have the power because we have the people's power. So it's not about money, it's about showing up. So what I'm trying to do right now is just invite anybody who wants to be a part of protecting and preserving Black neighborhoods to come over to Shady Grove tomorrow. That's at 3 o'clock from 3 to 6. So we have a full discussion on the developers, a full discussion on the city commissioners, and then at the end we'd have some action. And I don't know what the action will be because it will come from the people. So that's what Mama's Club is about. I'll come back because I have a couple of more announcements, but I really just want to say thank you to our panelists and thank you again for being here. And I'm looking forward to just really being more informed about Harriet Tubman. I mean, I know there's something new that comes up every year, every 6 months. And so I'm just so happy to be sitting in this chair and learning more. Because that's what it's about. If you're informed and you have a better education, then you can make some actions. And we have beautiful people here who's going to educate us along the way. So thank you. Back to you, Caitlin.
Great. So first we are going to hear from Dr. Arlisha Norwood. Let me flip through my pages. So she is an assistant professor of history at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And she received her PhD in history from Howard University. Her research focuses on 19th century African-American history with an emphasis on slavery, freedom, and Black women. Specifically, her work examines single African-American women in Civil War and post-Civil War era Virginia. And she is currently working on a manuscript tentatively titled To Never Truck with No Man, Single Black Women During the Civil War and Reconstruction. So I will turn it over to Dr. Norwood, and I am very much looking forward to learning from her today.
Hello, you all, and thank you for having me. I'm going to give the disclaimer now that I have a 10-month-old. And so if you hear some rumblings, it is just a baby who will not sit still. So please don't be alarmed. We don't have anybody trapped in some part of my house. He's just screaming his head off. I am going to present quickly about Black women on the home front and just tell you how I got into this topic and what my research kind of delves into. Along the way, I will weave Harriet Tubman into it. My research is wholly inspired by Harriet Tubman. And so I'm going to share my screen really quickly if I can. Let me see. Here we go. Share. Okay, let me present. Can we all see this? Are we seeing it? Okay, good. Okay, the presentation today is going to be Free Show Enough, Black Women on the Home Front. I should give a disclaimer now that I got into Black women during the Civil War. I am originally from Houston, Texas. My parents are from Jackson, Mississippi, or Mississippi in general, actually a small county right outside of Jackson. And as I was a child, for some reason, my African-American mother was obsessed with the Civil War. We used to watch Gone with the Wind. She would take me to the Battle of Vicksburg battle sites, and I would show up to these places and we would be the only Black people here. And I would, I was like 7 or 8, and I would turn to my mom and I would ask her, why are we here? Like, I want to go do something else. Like, I want to watch TV or, or play with Barbies. And she would always remind me that this was my history too. This was about me as well. And I should never forget that. As time went on, she kept on just pushing history on me till eventually I went and got a PhD in it. But I also came to appreciate and love the Civil War and everything about it. Even as a college student, I went to school in New Orleans, Louisiana, Dillard University, a historically Black college. And New Orleans is immersed with history, but I would always find things about the Civil War. And so that was my infatuation with the Civil War. We still watch Gone with the Wind together. It is an extremely poorly done movie and portrays African Americans in all the wrong ways, but it does show the impact of the Civil War and how it changed Southern culture. I'm a Southern girl through and through, and so it's important for other people to see themselves in this war in different ways. I got into Black women during the Civil War because of numerous things. But I started with my PhD at Howard in 2012, and there I studied under Dr. Edna Green Medford, who's one of the foremost scholars on Abraham Lincoln and emancipation. And she just kind of pulled me in as well, but I was also close to Virginia and Maryland. If you don't know anything about either one of these states, Virginia, of course, was home, where Richmond, Virginia was home of the Confederate capital. And so if you go to Richmond, you cannot help but every stop is a Civil War marker. Maryland has another precarious relationship with the Civil War, but still a relationship nonetheless. And so there are markers here indicating what battles happened here. If you a couple of not maybe 45 minutes away from here is the Battle of Manassas, or was one of the first battles of the Civil War. And so again, it just kept calling my name until eventually I decided to go into it. One of the first articles, and I hope you can see it on the screen, that pulled me into it as a budding historian in 2012, I began to just one of the random things that I love to do was go through the archives or go through the newspaper archives. And I got really obsessed with Civil War era newspapers, particularly the Richmond Dispatch. The Richmond Dispatch was, I think it went from earlier, so I think about 1820 and ended around 1870, but it was the most important paper in Richmond. And here I was just scrolling through the newspaper. Back then in 2012, it was scrolling because a lot of it wasn't available online. Today, you can just go through newspaper.com, thankfully, but I did not have that luxury back then. And so I was scrolling through the microfilm of the Richmond Dispatch, and I discovered this. And you can't really see it, this is an old picture, but it talks about 2 Negro women who were administered lashes for feeding the Confederate Army dog meat. And I stopped in my tracks. I was like, whoa, what is going on here? We have African-American women who are feeding the Confederate Army dog meat. What does that mean? Like, what does that say about African-American women and the Civil War, right? If they're feeding soldiers dog meat and they're trying to kill Confederate soldiers, as you all know, and if you don't know, I'm here to tell you that there are not too many books about African-American women in the Civil War. They're just not there. Today, we have historians like Thebolia Glimp, Tara Hunter. It's a lot more, but the Civil War is one of the most studied topics in American history. There are thousands upon thousands of books about the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Vicksburg, Abraham Lincoln, Robert E. Lee, General Sherman, everybody has several books, but you will not find that many books about Black women in the Civil War. They have been almost erased from the historiography, right? And so here I was in 2012, just randomly looking, and I'm like, okay, wait. So if we have Black women feeding Confederate soldiers dog food, we have women who participated in the war, right? We know that for sure. We know that these women, although not soldiers, are helping the Union Army defeat the Confederate Army. And so that started a 7-year PhD process, but it also inspired me in so many ways. After that, I started to look into women during the Civil War. So I got into Susie King Taylor, and Susie King Taylor worked as a teacher in Hampton, Virginia during the Civil War. If you know anything about Hampton University, Susie King Taylor taught under the Emancipation Tree. Susie King Taylor has an amazing autobiography or kind of diary that she actually published, but it talked about her time as a Black woman, she's a teenager during this time, as a teenager during the Civil War. And of course, I am in Maryland, or I'm close to Maryland in 2012, and that led me to Harriet Tubman. Generally, my knowledge about Harriet Tubman was what everyone else knows. It is the Underground Railroad, and that was it. I can't say it went beyond that. That is what we were taught, even on the undergraduate level, about the Underground Railroad. But again, I was pulled into it when I came to understand her role in the United States Civil War as a nurse, as a spy, as she led a raid, and so many other things. And it was actually Harriet Tubman's widow's pension, which we'll get into later, that kind of pulled me further into African-American widows. But I started with this article, which led me to thinking about the ways that African-American women contributed to the war effort. I knew that if it was here, if the Richmond Dispatch, a Confederate Army newspaper, was talking about African-American women feeding Confederate soldiers dog meat, that I could find it elsewhere. I then went into, I'm just getting out some of my notes, you all. I then went into African-American women in labor during with the Union Army. African-American women, just so we know, I can give a sort of background to this. They play a role in the Civil War as early as 1861, right? Until 1865. Initially, we are aware that African Americans ran towards freedom, right? So the Civil War sets off, and there are all these sorts of kind of guesses of what African Americans will do, what enslaved African Americans will do now that the Union and the Confederacy are formed and fighting against one another, right? They make it very clear in April of 1861 what they will do when 3 African-American men show up to Fortress Monroe in Virginia and claim that they are free. The reason that they say they are free is they say that because their labor was intended to contribute to the Confederate war effort, they are free and they should be free. And they should, or at the very least, they should be able to join under Union lines. And they do just that. General Butler lets them in, and in Fortress Monroe, they are welcome. The same day in 1861, and what is interesting is historians say those 3 men were actually accompanied by their wives, right? They enter Union lines and they actually ask for freedom for their family and them. They say, let me in, General Butler, but also let my wives and their children in as well. That sets in motion this kind of ball that keeps steaming toward freedom, right? That keeps steaming toward the eventual Emancipation Proclamation and the eventual 13th Amendment. But let us be very clear that it was the agency of African Americans that brought freedom to the forefront. If the Civil War was left up to the Union Army and the Confederate Army, it would only be about states leaving the Union and fighting. African Americans decided that, listen, if there is a chance for freedom, we will take it, and they did just that. So in 1861, these 3 soldiers set in motion how African Americans will enter Union lines, right? How they will enter into this place of being protected. I'll put protection in quotation marks because it is not necessarily a safe space, but being protected by the Union Army. When they arrive, General Butler is welcoming to them. They show up in the thousands and continue to show up into the thousands until eventually General Butler writes the Secretary of War and says, listen, there are 6,000 people within our gates. What are we going to do? We thought we were just going to let in 1,000 people. There are 6,000 African Americans within our gates. What will we do? From that moment on, the Union Army has a contentious relationship with African Americans in the war. Everywhere the Union Army goes, Black people are showing up and demanding, watch over us. We are no longer enslaved. We know that. We're not going to get into freedom, but we are no longer enslaved under our Confederate masters. The Union Army knows immediately that they can put African American males to work. They start building railroads, digging ditches. They know that men are useful for work, right? But these African American women that show up, they are kind of hesitant. We know that you all were enslaved, but we don't necessarily have a use for a woman. We don't want her to dig a ditch. We don't want her to, she can't protect anything, right? Based on these assumptions of 19th century womanhood. But African American women continue to show up, and the Union Army has to learn to deal with them. Again, because I study single African American women, I am particularly interested in the welfare or the situation, how the Union Army looked towards African American women receiving rations. And it is not nice. They are not kind. They are always trying to end African Americans' rations. And when I say rations, I'm talking about food or perhaps clothing, the makeshift shelters that Black women created. They're always trying to end their relationship abruptly with women. They are concerned about creating a dependent population. And so whenever they can and however cruel they can be, the Union Army often cuts African American women off of rations. Now, when Black women arrive, they often express their need to want to labor for the Union Army in whatever ways. So we have washerwomen, cooks, nurses. Harriet Tubman was a nurse. And so they play a role in the war front, especially when it comes to Union soldiers. Many times they are paid for their labor. Oftentimes, although they are under contract for their labor, they are not paid adequately. Up until, I want to say 1880, Black women are continuously fighting for their wages from the Union Army, but they did look to the Union Army to enforce labor wages. So if you all can imagine this, these are women who for the first time are being paid for labor, right? Being paid wages for their labor. And so they take advantage of this in every way. Some African-American women I talk about in my research joined the underground economy, which means that they, wherever there are soldiers, there was some sort of leisure surrounding those soldiers. And so many African-American women open up taverns. This is especially true in Washington, D.C., is especially true in portions of Virginia that were taken over by Union soldiers. And so they would find ways to make money, right? That this was something that if the Union Army wanted liquor, they would find ways to sell them liquor. They would sell, again, these are not women under contracts with the Union Army, but they would often sell food to Union soldiers, create lodging for Union soldiers. There's an important lodging space here in Washington, D.C. that was Black owned. And so they made money as best they could from the Union Army's presence. And again, I want to recall that the Union Army is not necessarily happy to have Black women with them, but they continue to come. And so what can they do? In September of 1862, we know that there's the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln issues. He gives the Confederate Army 100 days surrender, or the Emancipation Proclamation will go into effect on January 1st, 1863. That is what happens. And so what the proclamation does, to clarify, is that this is kind of the popular idea is that it frees everyone. Not true. What the proclamation does is it frees enslaved African Americans in Confederate held territory. So if you are enslaved in any place where there is a Confederate Army, you are free. Now, we all know that freedom comes with a ton of things, a ton of responsibility. And in this case, it came with the idea that you have to get to freedom. So wherever it is, you have to get there, right? If the Union Army is 5 miles away, you have to get there. If that 5 miles is through a swamp or a ditch or actually through a battle, doesn't matter, you have to get there. So African Americans risk their lives to get this freedom that the Emancipation Proclamation promises. And once they get there, they are free. They're free to no longer be enslaved, but more importantly, free to determine how they want their lives to look, right? I always tell my students that the Emancipation Proclamation we attach sort of a magical idea to it, that freedom came with the stroke of a pen. Although that did not happen, what did happen is that generations of people who had only been enslaved, right? Maybe people had died in their lineage who had only thought that when will this end? It did end for them once they got to the Union Army, and it changed everything. As we know that it is, Harriet Tubman is on the ground when this happens. Frederick Douglass is fighting for this to happen. Almost every Black leader understands how important the Emancipation Proclamation is when it happens. If you have been to an African-American church on January 1st, you know that there are watch parties for this monumental thing that is taking place, and it does change everything, especially for Black women on the home front. Black women on the home front, again, continue to come into Union lines because now they're free. And so this sort of a relationship that the Union Army did not want. They did not want African-American women there. They can't do anything about it once the Emancipation Proclamation hits. The women are coming and the men are coming, and it changes everything. The Emancipation Proclamation is also highly important because it allows African-American males to enlist in the Union Army and fight for their freedom. And so if there is nothing more, or if I've said nothing that is powerful, Black men taking up arms against the institution of slavery changes the trajectory of the war. Whatever the war or whatever people think the war was about before changes after that. And Harriet Tubman understood that. Again, Frederick Douglass understood that. White abolitionists understood that. And so the Emancipation Proclamation allows for Black men to enlist in the Union Army. But another thing that I studied that also Harriet Tubman is a part of, Black women, it allows for Black men to enlist in the Union Army, thereby making Black women widows of the American Civil War. And this is, again, a topic that you will not find any books about. There's maybe 2 or 3 books about Black women in the Civil War that discuss Black widows of the Civil War. If you live anywhere below the Mason-Dixon line, you are aware of white widowhood, be it on the Confederate or Union Army side. We are very aware of what white widows did during the American Civil War. We know about their parties, the way they grieved, how they survived. What we don't know about, though, or what there's not a lot of knowledge about it, how African-American women, how African-American widows survived the war. I look at this as the greatest offering that Black women gave during the Civil War, the sacrificial offering of their husbands, their sons, their uncles, caretakers, fathers. There are about 4,000 men who enlist in the Union Army in Virginia, in Norfolk, Virginia. So if you can imagine, the regiments there saw the heaviest combat, right? The Richmond, Virginia regiments are responsible for the fall of Richmond. That is how we get the end of the Civil War. If you read any primary sources about the end of the Civil War, Robert E. Lee actually marches to meet Ulysses S. Grant with Black soldiers following him, right? With Black men actually upholding, letting Robert E. Lee know what it is. Don't come here with no mess, Robert E. Lee. We already beat y'all. The war is over. Go and surrender. The same soldiers who are responsible for that. Funny story as we head into the month of June, the soldiers in Richmond, Virginia are also responsible for Juneteenth in Texas. This is not talked about, but Black men are responsible for ending the Civil War in Texas. They came there with a general, and they basically are the soldiers that enforced freedom. They enforced the end of the Civil War. Along the way, I want you all to keep in mind that there are African-American men dying, right? On their way to Texas for Juneteenth and the siege of Richmond in 1864 and 1865. They are giving their lives. And so not too many people think about what do they leave behind, right? And what they leave behind are African-American widows who from the start of it have an uphill battle to prove their widowhood, to prove what African-American widowhood would look like, and more importantly, to gain the benefits of widowhood. Harriet Tubman was one of those widows who worked diligently just to prove she was a widow, right? To prove, even though she should be recognized for her work during the Civil War, she worked diligently to prove that she's a widow of an African-American soldier. In Richmond, Virginia alone, based on the 4,000 men and what I study, there are about 2,500 women who file for pensions. Because the Pension Bureau is mostly ran by Northern white men, African-American widows continuously have to prove that they are worthy of a pension. A pension is about $8 a month, $2 or $3 per child. And so I want you all to, I can break this down, but you all are very smart, so you'll know this. So African-American widows had no marriage certificate, right? Enslaved African-Americans were not allowed to legally marry. They could marry culturally, but they could not legally marry, which means there was no marriage certificate to prove their marriage. And so after the Civil War, when Pension Bureau agents run in and say, hey, you lost your husband to the Civil War, but how do we know you were married to him? They rely on their community members to tell pension agents about their union. The pension files are lengthy. They could be between 70 to 100 pages, but what you'll find in them are Black women and Black community members just talking about what the union meant to the community. There are no paternity tests, right? And so when African-American widows ask for money or the benefits for their children, they continuously have to prove paternity. Whose child was this? How did the child look? Are you sure it was his child? And so this continues to be a contentious battle. Some African-American widows are still petitioning the Pension Bureau until the 1950s. right? And on top of that, the children of African-American soldiers are petitioning the Pension Bureau until the 1950s. So that's just the nature of trying to secure $8 a month, right? Just trying to prove that your husband, that you sacrificed for the war. In many cases, African-American widows were not granted pensions. At the turn of the century, the 20th century, at the turn of the 19th century, I'm sorry, pension agents decide to make it harder for African-American widows to gain money. So they're left out of the change in pension law. So they lose many of their benefits. There are all sorts of sources that speak to the widow population, especially in Virginia, being the most vulnerable and the most poverty-stricken population. They're left without husbands. They're left without ways to secure labor. Another interesting story that I came across while researching, which really started my my research into single Black women, was a woman named Polly Jennings. She was trying to secure a pension, was unable to. Polly Jennings is left with no form of labor, and she eventually, she kind of goes into a mental breakdown, and she ends up killing her newborn child. As the person she was laboring for let her know that they would no longer be able to offer her labor because she was pregnant. And so after years and years of trying to secure a pension, Polly Jennings is left with nowhere to turn, right? And so the interesting thing about the widow pension files is they kind of show this alternate idea of freedom, right? We think of freedom as this jubilation, which it was for many African Americans. It was this point at time in history where there was no longer the cloud of enslavement over you, right? You were no longer attached to the institution of slavery, neither were your children, but it also leads to form all of these other barriers, and the pension system is one of those. And so these are some of the ways. And like I said, Harriet Tubman filed for pension in 1897. She was denied initially because of some issues with her husband, Nelson Davis's name. Now, you all, we should know this and be very clear about it. Harriet Tubman is a very popular name in the 19th century. And so the idea, right, we should all wrap our heads around this. The idea that we are denying Harriet Tubman a pension for her husband's service is ridiculous. On top of that, Harriet Tubman should receive her own pension because she is also a part of the or a leader in the American Civil War. So she led a raid, she was a nurse, she was a spy, a bunch of other things. And so eventually she gets that pension for her service, right? No longer her husband's service. She receives it for her husband's service for a little while, but then it switches for her service, and Congress passes that into action. You know, to those are the benefits that she should receive as a veteran of the Civil War. I was at a panel on maybe a month ago, and there was this interesting conversation about what Harriet Tubman meant to the Civil War. And one of the things that one of the scholars brought up is that Harriet Tubman was probably, while we're talking about Black women in the Civil War, Harriet Tubman could sit down with her husband, Nelson Davis, and they could both talk about their experience in the war, right? He could talk about being a soldier, but she could also talk about being a soldier and how that looked, right? As we're talking about 19th century womanhood, what it meant for this woman to talk about what she gave along with her husband and what he gave. And so you all, I was like almost teary-eyed. It was a real dramatic moment for me, but that is just what this history does for me. I cannot say this and wrap it up, but this is what I hope you all learned from this presentation, is that there would be no Union victory without Black women. And I'm not just talking about Harriet Tubman, I'm talking about Black women who fed Confederate soldiers dog meat, Black women who labored for the Union Army for food, Black women who gave their husbands and sons to the war. There would be no Union victory without the help of African-American women. We know that even as we celebrate Memorial Day, a holiday started by African Americans to celebrate the veterans of the Civil War, the American Civil War is African American history wholly. And I'm not just talking about freedom and slavery, I'm talking about we were a part of every aspect of it, namely Black women. So thank you all. I hope that you learned something from this. Thank you all for having me, and I'm happy to hear all questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I think we do have one question, but we will hold it for the end. And then we will circle around and have questions for all of the panelists at the same time.
So let's give her a big applause. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Yeah, I got a lot of questions, but I'll wait till the end. So now it's my time to introduce Ernestine Wyatt, who is the great grand niece. No? Oh, well, maybe you need to introduce yourself. But let me say that you are an educator, an artist, and you are related to Harriet Tubman. But if you want to add any more to your bio, please feel free to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I am a great.
Okay.
Grandniece of Harriet Ross Tubman.
Okay.
And, of course, I'm always happy to talk about Aunt Harriet.
Mhm.
And, everyone knows about her liberation, self-liberating and liberating others during the, from Maryland. But what I found is that not many people knew about her Civil War service and what that actually was. What I would always hear is anything about it would be, oh, she was a nurse, she was a cook, she was a laundress. But I would always hear at the end, spy and scout. But see, I knew that she was a spy and a scout. And so I'm saying, why is the language, why do people keep saying that? Why do they keep saying she was a cook, a nurse, a laundress, and then add on like it was an afterthought? But it was just the reverse. And I will get to that in a moment, but I just want to say that. And so when I started out, I became co-founder of Harriet Tubman Day, Washington, D.C. And Lewis Fields, who's up in Baltimore, he was doing Harriet Tubman Days in Annapolis and in Baltimore. And so he, when I met him, he said, there's nothing in Washington. And I'm saying, yeah, there is. And so he kind of like urged me, he said, you need to go on and do that. So he and I, set out to do that. And we got the resolution from the council for Harriet Tubman Day, March 10th, to be celebrated here in Washington, D.C. Now that follows in 1993, the senior President Bush, making a proclamation that the nation on March 10th should celebrate her nationally, and that as Harriet Tubman Day. So what's happening is a movement that a lot of states are picking up, and cities within those states, and proclaiming March 10th as Harriet Tubman Day. Hopefully what will come out of that is that there will be a federal holiday one day with her, celebrating her and her life. So I'm going to talk about her Civil War service, but I want to talk about what prepared her, how it all began. And so I'll start with her birth. She was born Araminta Ross on the Anthony Thompson plantation. And this happened in 1822, March of 1822. Now we know that because there's a midwife that was paid $2 for the birth of a child to Rick Green on that plantation. So there was no one other than Aunt Harriet that could have been about. So we know that she was born in March of 1822, sometime around it. She could have been born on the day she died, which was March 10th. So anytime in the beginning of March, maybe late February, all the way to the 15th of March could have been. So here she is, born on that plantation, which is located in Dorchester County, Maryland. And she was born to Ben Ross Sr. and to Harriet Ritt Green. They met on the Thompson plantation because Ben Ross was enslaved on Anthony Thompson's plantation, and Harriet was owned by the granddaughter of Athol. I guess that's how you pronounce his name, or Athol. I always say Athol. And he gave Ritt to his granddaughter. And his granddaughter married somebody by the name of Brodus, Joseph Brodus, I think his name was. And they had a child, Edward Brodus. But after her husband died, she married Anthony Thompson. And this brought her to the Thompson plantation. And so Ritt and Ben married in 1808. And they lived on the plantation for a while. But of course, Brodus, a young Brodus, eventually left the plantation and took Harriet with him and her children. They had 9 children, Aunt Harriet being one of them. And my great-great-great-grandmother, her older sister, Soph, was another one of those 9. And Soph was sold off with her infant child still nursing. After she was born, Aunt Harriet grew into, she was a selfless woman. And this is where I want you to show the image of her, both images of her for me, please. Yeah, this is a portrait of her that was taken in Auburn when she moved there. And the next photo of her, number 2. This is the one that was auctioned off and became property of the National Museum of African American History and the Library of Congress. This is an image that is very small, maybe about, I would say about 3 by 5 inches. Not 3 by 5, maybe about 3 by 3, 3 by 4. And it's in a very beautiful photo album along with a lot of other notables during that time, Frederick Douglass included, because they were all friends of this one woman. And that was her photo album. So this is the 2 images that I wanted to show you, and of her earlier in her life. And so, she grew into this selfless woman, and that's how she was really able, God in her life helped her to be that woman that she grew into be, and be able to accomplish all the things that she was able to do prior to the Civil War and after, and in the Civil War and after. So next I want to talk about what things prepared her to enter the Civil War or made her so good at what she did. And I want to start with the faith and vision. So if you give me number 3, yeah. This is where, in my opinion, this is where it all started. And this is the general store in Bucktown. And this is the place where Aunt Harriet had the hit on the head. If you go to the next slide, next image, this is the inside of that store. So imagine Aunt Harriet here coming into this store, and she was out in the field at another plantation, which they could go to and work and do other things. She was doing flax, and flax seeds, when they're grounding and I guess whatever, becomes very oily. So she put it on her hands, and it was on her hands, and she put it on her hair, and she said her hair was sticking all over her head. And so she didn't want to go to the store with her hair all over her head. So she put this shawl on. So, you know, it goes to show that even though during that time of being enslaved, you know, she's still 12 years old and still, you know, concerned to a certain point about how she's looking. But anyway, she's going to this store, and there's a person in the store, an overseer, and another enslaved person is there, a man, and he's trying to escape. Well, he wants Aunt Harriet to stop him, but she's not going to do that. She steps out of the way. And if you can go to the next slide, that door, as she was standing near the door with another person, as he's telling her to stop that man, she moves to the side, and he runs past her. And as he's running past her, the overseer throws a 2-pound weight at him, but it hits her instead. It embeds into her forehead, which is covered partially with this shawl that she put on her head. Well, this shawl got embedded into her skull. Now, if you know about anatomy and physiology, because I'm a registered nurse, retired, but what happens is in the brain cavity, you know, you have the brain and the layers, thin layers, they're covered under the skull, and because the skull is the protection, the cranium. There's not much space in there for anything else but that brain. That's why when people have strokes, and they even have a small bleed sometimes into that area, it does so much damage, and it can kill you. So it embedded into her skull, fractured it. And I'm saying this is God, because she should have died, and they thought she was going to, but she did not. Really, that shawl helped to protect her brain to a certain extent. Well, she was out of it for a long time, and the results were is that she was left with what they call seizures, or you might call it narcolepsy, where she falls asleep at the drop of a hat. But then when she wakes up, whatever she was doing prior, you know, she can be in motion, or she could be saying something, and she'll drop asleep right there. And then as soon as she wakes back up, which could be a few minutes or maybe a little bit longer, she resumes whatever she was doing without knowing that there was any break there at all. So that's how she lived the rest of her life, with that happening to her. But also she began to have visions. And this is where she really connects with God, where he starts to show her things about what he wanted her to do. She had said before that he had come to her and said, Harriet, I want you to do this thing. And she said, no, Lord, you don't want me, because she didn't feel worthy, because she was enslaved and she couldn't read or write and all of those things. And so he came back again and said, no, Harriet, I want you. And she turned, she said, no, go away, Lord. And the third time he came, she said he came back and said to her, Harriet, I want you. So if you go to the word of God, God says that he takes something that means nothing to most people, and he elevates it, and he uses that to be able to do great things in this world. And that was her. And so, she accepted his call from that point on, and her faith was so childlike that she believed whatever he said to her, because she couldn't read or write. But I'm not saying that she didn't know anything about God prior to that, because, they had, according to Kate Larson, they had evangelists coming through there all the time. And so, they were being taught, and they were also enslaved people, especially in the islands, had a slave Bible that was used to teach them in a different way, so that they didn't know that God wants them to be free, that they used it to enslave them even more. So she knew of that. Her parents were believers, and so she was a believer. And so she went through her life believing and trusting God about what to do and consulting him. She built that relationship with him, that one-on-one relationship with him, because she says she talked to him all the time. Talked to him when she was doing her chores, talked to him when she was going to sleep, talked to him whenever. She was always talking to him. And that is what God wants us to do. He wants that one-on-one relationship with us. So you have this, and she's has this hit on the head, develops these visions where God is showing her things. Then she goes through her life. She finally, recovers to a certain point, but really the plantation owner is looking at her as something that's weak. You're no use to me. I'm going to try to sell you, even though it was there was a will that said he was not to sell any of Rit or any of her children. But he did it went behind and did it illegally. Went against the will and started selling out her siblings. So, but as she was growing up, how else it prepared her? She was strengthened to everything that she did from the time she was a young child on the plantation. She was strengthened by that landscape, because most of the time she had to be outdoors. She had to be outdoors. Her job was to man the muskrat traps. And she had to do that, and they're in the water, on the shore. They're in the water. And she had to do that all the time. Even in the wintertime, she had to do that. And so often she would get sick behind that. And then there were other things that she had to do in that landscape. So she learned to really become friends with it and know what it was. And even though it was such horrible things going on against her and to her, the landscape really became her friend, and she studied it and she watched it. And her father, Ben Sr., was really a person that really helped her to do that. And also the Watermen that came down from Baltimore, they also were instrumental in her being prepared. Her father, as we were talking about earlier, they just recently found the remains of the artifacts from his cabin that were located on the Anthony Thompson plantation. The wildlife refuge, they purchased that property. So now they could go on that property and do excavation, do a dig, and they found many different artifacts. And the one thing, and as a descendant, I'm romanticizing it. And where they found a $50 piece, 1808. And I said, wow, you know, this is the date of their marriage, the year that they got married, 1808. So I'm envisioning, well, how did he get that? Was it given to them as a gift on that day of their wedding? Or was it earned some other kind of way? I choose to believe it was given to them as a gift. And then I said, well, why is it still there? And he never sold it. He never purchased anything with it, but it could have been that he was saving it as a memento. It could have been that it fell down through the cracks of the floorboards and got lost, and that's why it's still there. But if you look at the coin, there is some oxidation going on there, and it's just beautiful. And the other things that they're finding, so it gives you a glimpse about his life and her life periodically when she was able to come there and be with him from time to time. But Aunt Harriet also came and spent a lot of time with him on the land, by the water, timbering. And he taught her many things about the landscape, how to read the landscape. And I can just imagine how many more things he was teaching her. Because I look at it, when I think about when I as a child, I would help my dad do things, and we were just one-on-one. He was always teaching me about something. So I can imagine what he was teaching her. She also, like I said, learned from the Watermen, learned about what to expect on the outside in the world that was freer, where people moved about, and the Watermen, they were free. And so that was one of the other things. The other thing that prepared her with the Civil War and became known to the governor of Massachusetts was her escapes. You know, how successful she was at that. You know, because she liberated herself in 1849. And then once she became free, you know, she looked at that and she said, you know, even though it was good to be free, she remembered her family was still in bondage. And that was not something that she felt that she could go forward with. So she had to start returning to the shore to do that. And so in doing that, she had to prepare a strategy of how she was going to do that, how she would notify them, get word to them, how she would navigate once she did this and got there, how, you know, what times they would travel, all those different things. And then to have once she started going back, let's see, 1850, I think she went back for the first time because she had to work. You know, in between her trips, she worked to earn money to go back. And so during this time, the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act was enacted. So then that's another change, another strategy she had to develop. Okay, I have to get them to this place, then I have to get them to another place. And that another place was further off, which was Canada. So she had to develop different strategies in doing that. And when she did it, she learned how to disguise herself, because it was said about her, many people described her as really, because of the wound on her head and the effect of it, they felt like she was slow-witted. That's how she looked to them. But they said, don't be swayed by that, because when you look in her eyes, you could see how sharp she was. And she was a very intelligent, very sharp cookie. And, and she was very, very strong as well, strong physically and strong in her mind. So learning all of that, disguising herself, knowing how to read others, and she was very good at doing that as well, and learning how to communicate, ways of communicating with people. Like I said, because she had to find ways to let people know when she was in the vicinity, or because there was a time when she was going to, come after her brothers, and she sent a letter because she can't read or write, but she had to get word to them. So she sent it to another person, and she disguised herself as, I think, the son writing to his father. Had somebody dictate that letter, and it got to him. And they said, and they, of course, the powers that be opened that letter, wanted to, see what was in it. But he said, no, I don't know what that is, because I don't have that. I don't know what that is. Her name wasn't on it, but he knew from her clues who she was, what was happening, and that she was coming in to get someone else to liberate. And so those are ways of communicating and strategies that she was able to develop and find. And also, through the Underground Railroad network, she learned how to network with other people, learned how to communicate and rely on other people and make connections, learn who to trust and who not to trust. Like I said, being able to read someone and read the clues that people give off. She had a good way of looking at not what you said, but how your body language was presenting itself. So, I mean, God just really prepared her well. The other thing was leading others. God says he gives us all gifts, and he gave her many gifts. And one of the gifts he gave her was as a leader. She was able to set limits. She was able to give directions, and they knew that she was not joking about things. So she did not, when she said it was time to go, it was time to go. She didn't wait for you, and she didn't tolerate you dragging your feet, or I'm not going to do this, or I'll get out there. Oh no, I can't do this. She did that one time with her brothers, and that was in 1849 when they took off, and they said, no, we got to go back. We got to go back. And she said, okay, I'll go back with you. But then right after that, in a couple of weeks or more, not more than 3, she took off again. And that was when she was successful and she was by herself. But, she did all of this, and this prepared her. And her parents were the last that she took out pretty much, because they said they wanted to stay around until everyone had gotten out. It wasn't just family. It began like that, where she wanted to free and liberate all her family. But it also, she allowed anyone else that wanted to come and go. But she set limits on how many she would take at one time, because she knew, I don't want to get caught, and I don't want you to get caught. So, she set those limits. And her last trip to the Eastern Shore was in 1860. And so, and during that time also, prior to that, which there's a couple of things that was prior to the Civil War that she was involved in. So like in 1858, around that time, she was in Boston, and she was networking, trying to get money to help take care of her parents. So she did that. She was there in Boston and met many people. And she also met Governor John Andrews. And in 1859, she met John Brown. Now, I guess everybody pretty much knows about John Brown. and his raid on Harper's Ferry, which was, unsuccessful. But she meets him at her home in St. Catharines before she leaves there. Because also in 1859, she purchases a home in Auburn, New York from William Seward, who was the Secretary of State at the time. And that's in Auburn. And so she purchases that property. And then she brings her parents into Auburn. But during that time, before she left there, she met John Brown. And then helped him in, to, talk to him about his raid and everything, as did Frederick Douglass. So we know that his raid was not successful. But what happened though, and a lot of people will call that a precursor to the Civil War, is because even though it failed, it said something to the southern states about what was happening, what was looming. And South Carolina, after Lincoln is elected president in 1860, South Carolina also succeeds from the Union. And following him are all the other ones: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, and then they form the Confederate States, and then you have Virginia and Arkansas and Tennessee and North Carolina joining them. So they're all succeeded. And then and Harriet is still milling around up in the New England states, and she knows about some of the things that are she knows about what's happening. And so in 1861, the Fort Sumter, that firing, that started the Civil War in April. So we're here now, where she's with Governor John Andrews, and he says to her, in his correspondence, you see different mentioning of her and about her in different ways, about the colored woman and Moses and things like that. He commissioned her to go down into South Carolina he said, I want you to go and be a spy and a scout. So he sends her there for that reason. He doesn't send her there to be a laundress, a cook, and a nurse. He sends her there to be a spy and a scout. And the reason why he sends her there to do that, because he knows her history. He knows her history of her success as a liberator prior to that. And that's what you need when you're trying to get information about someone else in order to help you do what to work against them. So he felt that she would be a great asset. So he asked her to go. So if you can give me the next slide. This is a slide of the Maryland, Dorchester County, the marsh, the wetland marshes. This is part of the Blackwater Refuge. And just pay attention to how it looks. Now, if you go to the next slide, this is Beaufort, South Carolina. The marsh is there. So it looks similar. This is another asset that she had because the landscapes looked similar. And this allowed her to be able to navigate much easier because she knew the lay of the land and how to move in and out and about those marshes. So during this time, she goes down. He gives her government transport And there are some things that occurred that, like I said, she knows how to read people. So there was one incident where whoever was supposed to take her, I forgot his name, but she said, I'm not going with him. She didn't like the way he looked, how he was presenting himself. So she decided, I'm not going with him, and changed and did something different. But anyway, she arrived. She finally arrived. And when she first arrived, though, she started doing, you know, what was happening at the time, which was giving aid to the people who were wounded and sick, because a lot of the soldiers were dying of dysentery and all like that. And even one general officer was dying of the same thing. And so she made, she knew about medicines and how to make them from herbs and from roots. And so she would make those things and she applied it to him and he was healed. So he said, you know what, let her go in and have access and do whatever she needs to do, help assist her, whatever she tells you to do it. So if you go to the next slide, this is an image, it's a double image of the same thing, of the hospital where you would see the officers, okay? And so it's very likely that she was in this building or one of them, nursing, you know, and applying the medicines to this general. And so that also leads me to the fact that, you know, in her commission, when he told her to do what she was to do, when she got there as well, General Hunter also gave her the pass and said, you come and go at will on the government transport whenever you need to. He gave her carte blanche going into the commissary to get whatever she needed, supplies she needed for herself. And if you know anything about the commissary during that time, at 1825, the people that were enlisted, they had to get their anything supplies that they needed, they had to get that from private vendors on the street. And those vendors could charge them exorbitant prices for whatever. So you had to be an officer to be able to go into the commissaries. So she was afforded that right to go into those commissaries and get whatever she needed. So she's doing this. And when she's not being the spy and the scout, you know, she did the nursing and did cooking, but mostly she did nursing. She would do cooking after a certain point when she only earned $200. She was only given $200 during her time there. And that $200 was given to other people, to support other people. She gave them to the soldiers, she gave them to the free people to help them. So she didn't really use that money for herself. So then that's when she really started cooking. She would bake her gingerbread and make root beer, and she would sell it to the soldiers and to other people. So doing all of that and nursing, go to the next slide, please. This is a hospital for the contraband. The contraband were the runaway slaves who came to the Union camps. And this was a place where they were, where they could be taken care of. And of course, also in the fields. So this is another place that she could have been in, more than likely was in doing what she did. As far as things progressed, and during that time, and she was doing her duties, there's documentation. I know there were a few people talking about, well, you know, we don't know much about her, that doing this and being a spy and a scout. And okay, so, but is that something that is common knowledge when you're a spy and a scout? Are you advertising that to people? That's supposed to be unknown. And a letter from Frederick Douglass's son to his wife, in his letter to her, he said, guess what? Guess who I saw down here? I saw Harriet and she was a captain of a gang of scouts. So it's well documented that there were about 9 people, and they name them who they were, of who she was over as you know, as working with her and being a scout, and doing her spy work. So she used many disguises, and but the thing I want to say about that is that Aunt Harriet, and this is what I tell people about the $20 bill. She deserves to be on that money. You know, I mean, the $20 has so much significance to me because it ended up being what she was getting as a pension. Plus, it also is, why not her? She was an American patriot. She said about Abraham Lincoln. Now, see, Sojourner Truth embraced Lincoln right away. Aunt Harriet, she didn't embrace him right away. She said, no. She said, you're not allowing these free Black people to serve. No, you can't win the war if you don't allow them to do that. You have to let them serve. That's the only way you're going to win. And that's the only way God's going to let you win, because God doesn't want any of us enslaved, you know. And so on January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation. Now that presents another story, you know, because after that, you have the 13th Amendment, but the 13th Amendment that abolishes slavery also has an exceptions clause in it. And just recently, like last year, I think it was, where they introduced a bill to for that amendment to go forward to eliminate that from the from that amendment, that there would be no toleration of slavery under any circumstances. So you know, but that wasn't the focus then. You know, it was about abolishing it, but it didn't get abolished altogether because it allowed a loophole for states to interpret loosely the way they wanted to, which kept slavery by another name, which is what we are dealing with even now today. So getting off of that, going back to her Civil War service, you know, January 2nd, which was the celebration day, and what she did. Now, she led the raid on the Combahee River. Now, she led that raid based upon the intelligence that she gathered. She analyzed that intelligence, shared it with Montgomery. They created a strategy of how to go forward with that. And they got on, if you go to the next slide, please. This is an image of one of Lincoln's gunboats. There were 3 of them. Now, Aunt Harriet was on the largest one, and the one that had 300 soldiers on it, black soldiers on it. and they went up the Combahee River, destroyed all the money-making ability of those plantations. You know, they bombed them, and they took out everything that they could do anything with. So that was on June 2nd, 1863. Now, Colonel James Montgomery, going back to John Brown, they knew each other prior to the Civil War. They knew each other in Kansas, and they didn't tolerate slavery. It was kind of rough. You know, they had a reputation. So here he is at that same kind of reputation. And Robert Gould Shaw did not like that part about Colonel James Montgomery, but you know, he respected him and his abilities. So that was done on that day, and they were successful. Then later, on June 5th, 1863, and this gives you another idea of how things turned. There was a court martial of a private, Johnny Webster, and he was responsible for doling out food and rations and supplies to people. Well, he sold brown sugar and some other sugar to Aunt Harriet and to one of the scouts. And she went to a store. She was trying to sell it because she thought it was okay for her to do that. Well, he happened to be present, but so what happened is he was found out and they court-martialed him. And then because she was a witness, they brought her into the court to give testimony. Now you can see her testimony in the National Archives. It's there. So you can read the whole account about what happened there. So that they took her word as, you know, that it was you know, true. Well, 6 weeks after that raid, you see her appearing again, and this time as a nurse with and cooking for Gould Shaw, Robert Gould Shaw, and this is with the 54th Massachusetts, and we know what happened there, and she gives an account of what it sounds like to her, what it looks like to her, because she wasn't that far from where it all happened. She was only, I guess, less than a mile or more. So that's what that is all about. And in 1892, like Dr. Arlisha Norwood said about her pension, you know, before in 1865, she talked to Seward about getting something, a pension, for her services as a spy and a scout. And so he gave word to someone else. But it wasn't until 1892, because she saw that wasn't really going anywhere. So in 1892, after they did the law for widows to receive pension, she applied for one for her husband, Nelson Davis, who in the infantry, he was called Nelson Charles. But he took his biological father's name after the Civil War, or during the Civil War and after. So she receives, the pension goes through, she receives it in 1895, $8, okay, $8 a month. Well, it wasn't until 1899 that she received her pension as a nurse. And this is what I want to bring out about that, is that, and it just is so similar to what is going on right now. First, in United States Congress, the bill passed for this to happen. Well, and they wanted to give her $25. Well, what happened was Senate said, nope, nah. Her alleged, I'm in quotes, alleged participation in the military, we can't give her that. We can't even give her $25 for her nursing duties. Because most nurses get $12. Now it says most nurses, doesn't say all nurses, just says most nurses. So in other words, there are some nurses getting paid $25, but not on Harriet. Nope, we're not going to give her that. So they give her an additional $12, which amounts to $20 a month that she gets, but not ever for her services as a spy and a scout. So that leads us to today, which is great. Finally, as of the coming June 26th, she will be inducted she'll be an inductee into the Military Intelligence Corps Hall of Fame as a full member. That says they are recognizing her as a spy and a scout. It's not for her, not for nursing, not for laundry, not for cook, but for her work as a spy and a scout. So finally, she is being recognized. Now, they had inducted her a couple of years ago as an honorary member, and I was really happy about that. And then I began to look at the wall, and I saw somebody named Elizabeth forgot her name, and an enslaved person that she had enslaved. And they were on the wall. And I'm saying, why are they on the wall and Aunt Harriet's not on the wall? They were full members. And I wanted to find out about that. And so I was told that, well, I think we think the criteria has changed or whatever. And so, but they invited me. They said, well, you can write a new narrative. You have until a certain time. So thank God that had not this other person, her name was Constance Huff. She's a retired military person. She wrote the initial application because she was doing something and she saw how great Aunt Harriet's work was, and she felt, oh, she needs to be on that wall. So, but it did not pass until a few years later, where they said, okay, we'll make her honorary. But then I started thinking, no. I'm happy about it, but she needs to be a full member. And so they invited a new narrative for me to write a new narrative. And that's when I asked anybody that wanted to be involved, said, if you got more information or if you want to help, and write some, you can do it. And so Kate Larson, who was the author of the book for Maryland, Bound for the Promised Land, she wrote a letter as well. And so Aunt Harriet is now being recognized for her work. So I will receive her certificate and her medal as that. The other thing, I think, what else is there that is happening now for her? Oh, and during my celebration this year, the General Anthony Hale, he came on, and as well as the senator from Arizona and the Congresswoman Holmes Norton, and giving congratulations for Aunt Harriet for her on this happening. What he said was so beautiful. He said that special operations that we have now, that she was the first, and that's what everything else is. The special operations we see now is based on that, all that clandestine work that she did then and everything. So I just thought that was just magnificent. So people really need to understand, and people need to stop saying those words. Oh, she was a nurse and a scout and a laundress, because first she was a spy and a scout. That's why she was asked to go down there. And she had strong feelings about it and what had to happen. And one last thing is that in her work, like I said, she was selfless. You know, she was a woman well ahead of her time. She was a pharmacist. She was a spy, a scout. She was a marketing person. She took that $200 that she had, and she know what she did with it? She opened up a wash house. That wash house where she took the freed women and told them, look at here, you had these skills you were using on the plantation, use them now. This is how you're going to make your living. And this is who you'll market it to, you know, showing them the soldiers. She also did that by setting up a field kitchen, doing the same thing. And this is the money that she took. When they complained about her going into the commissary, she stopped and said, okay, I won't go in anymore. And that's when she began baking and doing those kinds of things to support herself while she was there. So, you know, it was always about her giving the advantage to people all the time. And so now she's starting to, that's coming back, and it's something that is so much needed now to reveal her faith and what that can do for you, that reveals her love for family and her love for people in general. And that is all coming from God. And that is what he wants us to do, because he loves through us. That's how he does it. So I want to thank the Matheson Museum and Faye Williams and for inviting me and making me a part of all of this. I have really enjoyed sharing my knowledge. I think, do I have any more? Oh, yes, I do. Go to the next slide, please. This is Aunt Harriet, a few years, maybe 2 years before she passed. This is in front of the John Brown home for the infirmed, and this is in Auburn. Now, the property is still there, and the building is still there, except the foundation is the only thing that is there. The top part was burned down, but the foundation is still there, and it's behind a grove of trees. So you really have to walk around those trees in order to be able to get to that part and see it, but it's still there. And if you go to the next slide, the woman that's standing on the back row on the left-hand side, that is my great-great-grandmother. That is Mary Elliott Gaskin. And she worked alongside with Aunt Harriet in that home as well. So, and you see Aunt Harriet kind of like, you know, stooped over and everything, but she was active until she was like, I guess 89. She was active and still getting around and doing things. So, but this is where she passed away, is in that home. So I want to thank everybody for listening to me.
Well, thank you so much. That was fascinating.
Yes, yes.
Appreciate you taking the time to share that with us today.
Yeah, can we give her another applause? I mean, the whole panelist. And I want to go back and see if Terri can step up to the plate. Well, let's breathe in and out for a minute, you know, let's just calm down a minute. I'm so excited. I mean, I couldn't even introduce you, Tina, but you know, I was so excited. I'm still excited. So let's just breathe in and out a minute and, you know, get centered. I guess it's for me. Just in and out, in and out, in and out. So I want Terri to recite the poem by Eloise Greenfield. And then the last poem will be at the end after the questions, if you don't mind. Okay, Terri, it's on you. We have a bunch of questions coming, so we will get to the questions.
Okay, and look, I just had to draw a circle around the poem because I was taking notes
Yeah.
to make sure I didn't write on the poem. Thank you, Dr. Norwood and Miss Tina. We really appreciate you. This poem is by Eloise Greenfield, and it's called Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman didn't take no stuff, wasn't scared of nothing neither, didn't come in the world to be no slave, and wasn't gonna stay one either. Farewell, she sang to her friends one night. She was mighty sad to leave them, but she ran away that dark, hot night, ran looking for her freedom. She ran to the woods, and she ran through the woods with the slave catchers right behind her, and she kept on going till she got to the north where those mean men couldn't find her. 19 times she went back south to get 300 others. She ran for her freedom 19 times to save Black sisters and brothers. No, Harriet Tubman didn't take no stuff. She wasn't scared of nothing neither. Didn't come in this world to be no slave, and didn't stay one either. I said she didn't stay one either. And don't you be a slave. Stop being a slave. Ashe.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Caitlin, are we ready to go to questions or?
Yes.
Let's do it.
One question in the Q&A box right now that I think is for Dr. Norwood, and it is just somebody asking for clarification. The women who were feeding the soldiers, did they feed them dog food or dog meat?
Dog meat. It's dog meat mixed with pork. And we know that it is bad because they received lashes for it. So it is not a delicacy, or they actually were punished for feeding the Confederate soldiers dog meat, which was actually African-American women as cooks were, it was commonplace for them to feed Confederate soldiers bad things to make them sick and make them not good soldiers. So it was a normal occurrence.
See, we've got one hand raised. Oh, it's Terri has raised her hand.
So I wrote a story a while ago, and Harriet Tubman is a guide on that as a part of that story. And so I argued with my professor and said that she would have spoken a slave dialect. But as you know, later in life, I'm starting to find out that maybe she didn't. Dr. Norwood, could you clarify, or either Ms. Tina, could you clarify whether or not she spoke more of a Queen's English or a slave dialect?
Yeah, I would imagine that she spoke like African Americans from the Eastern Shore. So I don't know if it, so I would not, so she was an enslaved woman from an enslaved family. Her father was free. So she would have spoken definitely with a Southern accent, as Marylanders are Southern, and we try to not do that, but they are Southerners, so she would have definitely had a Southern accent. Slave dialect, it is up. I know that she could not read or write, but when she was I know that in Kate Clifford Larson's book, she talks about as she would, was part of Kate Clifford Larson's, which I think is great, talks Bound for the Promised Land, talks about what she did after the Civil War. And unfortunately, Harriet Tubman was not very wealthy after the war. She was always, as she stated, was always looking to make money, always looking to support her family, which was very large in Auburn, New York. And so she would go different places and they would remark on her dialect. But more importantly, Harriet Tubman was known for her singing voice. She was a deeply spiritual woman, so she was always singing, but that's what she would partially do on her way to on the, I guess, the outlet, which was where she was trying to make money. But they remarked on her voice, not necessarily the slave dialect, but how strong it was, how she commanded energy when she walked in the room. So I'm not sure about the slave dialect, but perhaps she could speak more to that.
Well, I don't know what you mean by slave dialect. Certainly, it was the King's English, but just like we have Ebonics,
Right.
things like that. Yeah, that's how she spoke. But as Dr. Norwood was just saying, her presence was very commanding, and she spoke. It wasn't necessarily about how she enunciated, but it was about what she was saying and how she delivered it, and the way that she delivered it, that she commanded any audience that she was in front of, whether it was one-on-one or 50 to 100.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you both. And it wasn't a question that was meant, to be offensive in any way or form, because throughout the story, that she is the lead character in the story, leading the other characters throughout. But I just, in terms of being more historically accurate, as new movies come out and everything, they have her being quite articulate and speaking more like I'm speaking right now, as opposed to how I talk when I code switch.
Yeah. Well, she was.
Thank you. Thank you.
Was articulate.
Can we go to? Yeah. Thank you very much, Terri, for your question. How many more questions do we have? Because I don't want to leave anybody out. Caitlin?
Yeah, we've got 2 more right now. So the
Okay, so let's take those.
is this person would like to know, how did Harriet afford to purchase Secretary Seward's home, and did I understand correctly that she did?
Yeah, she did. He gave her a mortgage, of $1,200, and so she had a garden. She had ways that she was earning an income. She did laundry, because my grandmother talked about being with her when she was younger, and how she would go out with Aunt Harriet delivering laundry and things like that. So, there were different things that she did to make money. But the thing about Aunt Harriet, as soon as she would make money, she'd give it away. She would give it to whoever. And I know this is where I differ with everybody that talks about Aunt Harriet, where they say that she died penniless. You know what? If you've got land, you're not penniless.
There you go.
And she had land. She had property, but that was property she was not going to sell. And then after that property, the property that he sold her had 7 outbuildings on it. Then later on, she purchased another 25 acres of land. So, but what she did was she turned that around and just gave it to other people all the time. With no thought of, okay, what I got to do with it tomorrow or whatever. Oh, let me just give it to you. So that kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. The last question that we have right now is for Ms. Tina, and the public would like to know a bit more about Harriet's descendants leading up to yourself.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Can you tell us more about Harriet's descendants leading up to yourself?
Oh, okay. In my line. Talking about in my line. Okay. If you like I said, Aunt Harriet had there were nine siblings, and my great grandmother was one of her older sisters. Her name was Soph. Now, if you saw the movie, the one thing that was accurate about the movie was when you saw these 2 women on the cart being sold off. One was Lina, one was Soph, and they were 2. One of her, she had 3 older sisters. They were 2 of them that were being sold off. And so you have Soph, and Soph's brother or Aunt Harriet and Aunt Harriet's brother, gives testimony saying that because we knew Anne Marie was in the house. We knew that from the records and everything. We knew that Anne Marie Ross was living there, and we knew how old she was. But we always thought that she was a sibling. But we learned later that she was the daughter of Soph. And then when Aunt Harriet liberated the family and took us up to Auburn, because that's where my mother is from, Auburn, New York. And when I was growing up until the time I left Buffalo, I spent many, all the time there. As long as my grandmother was there, I was there all the time. So was my mother. We all were there. It was close to Buffalo. And so when we would go there, Aunt Harriet, my grandmother would always say, well, let's go visit Aunt Harriet. And I'm saying, go visit Aunt Harriet. Aunt Harriet is dead. And, you know, and why do you call her Aunt Harriet? You know, I was a little kid, didn't know, but I didn't know that until I found out later that she did know Aunt Harriet. To call her Aunt Harriet was personal. So that is Anne Marie Ross became Anne Marie Ross Stewart in Auburn, New York. Then Anne Marie Ross Stewart married another man, and his name was Thomas Elliott. Now, if you look at Maryland history, Thomas Elliott was known as part of the Dover Eight, and that escape. So it was, you know, all those plantations, they kind of knew each other, you know, in and throughout there, and they all went to different plantations to work and do other things. So they knew each other. It was a community. She married, he came up to Auburn, she married him. And then they had the woman I just showed you, Mary. Her name was Marietta Marietta Elliott Gaskin. And there was two of them. The other one's name was Martha. Anne Marie died in the late 1800s, Anne Marie did. My great-great-grandmother spent a lot of time with Aunt Harriet. And actually that's where she was born. She was born in Aunt Harriet's house. So then after that, my great-great-grandmother had my grandmother, and her name was Elida Gaskin Stokes Chafin. And then she had my mother, and my mother's name was Hazel Stokes Martin. Leads me to me. And my name is Ernestine Tina Martin Wyatt.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the next question is for Dr. Norwood. They would like to know what books you recommend about Black women during the Civil War, and are you writing your own book that they can watch for?
I am writing my own book, but it will be a couple of years out. It'll be about single Black women during Civil War and Reconstruction. The foremost historian, well, to me, I will say the foremost historian to me on Black women is Tavolia Glimp. She writes Out of the House of Bondage. She has another book about African-American women in the Civil War. The name is escaping me because it's fairly new. I would say Kate Clifford Larson's book, Bound for the Promised Land, is a great book in terms of just not only Harriet Tubman's life, but also it really delves into the world that Harriet Tubman lived in, right? We always look at history as a one event and one person, but as Ms. Tina was talking about, her relationship with John Brown, her relationship with Frederick Douglass, her relationship with William Seward. So as I said in my presentation, these were the people that were fighting for African-American freedom during the Civil War. The soldiers on the field, the women on the home front, but it was also African-American leaders pushing that story to the forefront. who else would I recommend? Anything by my advisor, Dr. Edna Green Medford, who breaks down the Emancipation Proclamation. Again, Ms. Tina was talking going into it. It's an extremely comprehensive document, but it changes the life of African American in the Civil War so many ways. So anything by Dr. Reedy, Joseph P. Reedy has a new book out about African American women in the Civil War, African Americans during the Civil War. The scholarship is changing. Black women are being included in the narrative now. And so, you know, we hope to get more books, right? I hope there's a library full of books about Black women during the Civil War because they deserve it. So, but those are some I can think about, and hopefully my book in the next 5 years or however many years my son allows me to write it. Maybe it'll be, maybe by the time he's 18. So yes.
Yeah.
And can I add one more book to that?
Sure.
Please.
My aunt, and she was just recently given a honorary doctorate by Lemoyne College in Syracuse, and she's 90. Joyce is what, 91, 92. She's the second oldest in our maternal line. And she wrote a book, and she was doing research way back when. And so she has a book, and it's called Beyond the Underground on Harriet, Moses of Her People. So if you want to read that and learn more about my family line and see images and things like that. You know,
Can you all tell us where to order your books? Do we order from you, or the publisher, or I think Amazon? But where do we order your books? Is it
Sankofa Media? She does have a website, and that's awful. I don't remember the website, but it's Sankofa Media, and it's out of Syracuse. Let me see, maybe also give me the website. The website is www.mosesofherpeople.com.
Moses of Our People. Okay. Great. Dr. Norwood, where can we get your book?
Amazon. It's available on Amazon. So, you know, and if you would like to purchase any individual copies, you can reach me on thehistoryconsultants.com.
You said history?
Yes, thehistoryconsultants.com. I actually put it in the chat.
Okay. I hate to go to Amazon for anything, but
Yes.
sometimes we have to. Sometimes we have to, but they were the ones who knocked out most of the independent bookstores. I know. Yes. Okay. I have one more question for Dr. Norwood, and then we're coming to you, Terri. I think you were talking about the pension. I mean, the Civil War ended in 1865, but you mentioned something 1880 that got paid. Were you talking about the pension? What were you talking about then?
So the pensions, you could apply for a pension as early as 1863 when African Americans could enlist in the Civil War. But I was saying that even until the 1920s, African Americans were still applying for pensions. And so you could get them for, like Harriet Tubman did not apply immediately after the Civil War. She applied in the 1880s. But you could apply as, they went for a couple of reasons. If your husband, partner, son, or our caretaker was deceased, or they received injuries during the Civil War. And so if somebody survived the Civil War and died in 1870, you could still apply in 1880. So that's how it went. But the pension files, people received pensions way into the 1930s and 40s for the Civil War. They ranged in amounts. They could, it was normally, it fluctuated. Black women, around the turn of the century, it became harder for Black women to receive pensions just because the Pension Bureau believed that we all know this narrative, that they were scamming the system and receiving money. And so they cut a large majority of Black women off, making it harder for them to receive. And keep in mind, they did, their husbands passed away, they did serve. But it was just harder for them to receive it. They made it difficult. As soon as they could attach the idea of too much welfare or too dependent on
Right.
a group of people, they did so to single Black women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Sounds familiar, like today with the
Yeah.
Senate. You know,
Me
with
today.
the same Senate. Okay. All
Yeah.
righty. So let's just clap again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Breathe in 3 times. Let go, let go. One more time. And now we have Sister Terri, another poem from Sonia Sanchez. Come on with it, Terri.
Called Haku and Tanka for Harriet Tubman.
That's right. I chose them this time.
Picture a woman riding thunder on the legs of slavery. Picture her kissing our spines, saying no to the eyes of slavery. Picture her rotating the earth into a shape of lives becoming. Picture her leaning into the clouds of into the eyes of our birth clouds. Picture this woman saying no to the constant yes of slavery. Picture a woman jumping rivers, her legs inhaling moons. Picture her ripe with the seasons of legs, running. Picture her tasting the secret corners of woods. Picture her saying, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world. Imagine her words. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Imagine her saying, I freed 1,000 slaves, could have freed 1,000 more if they knew they were slaves. Imagine her humming. How many days we got before we taste freedom? Imagine a woman asking, how many workers for this freedom quilt? Picture her saying, a live runaway could do great harm by going back, but a dead runaway could tell no secrets. Picture the daylight bringing her to woods full of birth moons. Picture John Brown shaking her hand 3 times saying, General Tubman, General Tubman, General Tubman. Picture her words. There's 2 things I got a right to. That's death or liberty. Picture her saying no to a play called Uncle Tom's Cabin. I am the real thing. Picture a Black woman could not read or write, trailing freedom refrains. Picture her face turning southward, walking down a southern road. Picture this woman, freedom bound, tasting people's preserved breath. Picture this woman of royalty wearing a crown of morning air. Picture her walking, running, reviving a country's breath. Picture Black voices leaving behind lost tongues. Ashe.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Ashe. Woo! Thank you, thank you, thank you. Caitlin,
Yes.
comments, and I'll end it.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I really enjoyed, I think this was a fantastic presentation, and I hope that everybody in the audience learned a lot today. I know that I sure did.
Yeah.
So thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to Ms. Fay and Mama's Club for partnering with us on this. Please do respond to that survey to let us know what you thought, and let us know what you'd like to see from us in the future.
Thank you. And I want to say, please plug in to Mama's Club. We have a Facebook page. We don't have a website. It's a Facebook page, Mama's Club, and you'll be able to find out a little bit more about us. And then I have one announcement, and that's the community meeting, the mass meeting we're having tomorrow over at Shady Grove Baptist Church, where we'll be talking about protect and preserve historic Black neighborhoods. So I'm really happy to say that we will have our council meeting with Desmond Duncan Walker. She's the new officer for District 1. And we have speakers coming from Duval, Spring Hill, Sugar Hill, Lake Road, Fifth Avenue, Pleasant Street, Lincoln Estates, Porter's Quarters, Power District, Kirkwood, and Cade Museum. So please, please, please be there, be there. If you're not able to, you may know a lot about what's happening in terms of developers and the City Commission in Gainesville, but if you're still interested, just show up at the meeting. You don't have to talk, we won't pull, we got enough speakers, so we don't need you speaking, but we need an audience and we need you to be there. And it starts from 3, we're saying from 3 to 6. We know we're probably gonna go past that because a lot of people got a lot of things to say. I just wanna say thank you again for being a part of this. And I look forward to the next forum, the next seminar, the next event with the Matheson Museum. Thank you.